All right, we are now live. So, not unironically, I guess, or I guess not ironic. I don't know what the word is. We are talking about podcasts on our first podcast.
On our very first podcast. Woohoo!
Woohoo! So let me ask a question. I'm just really interested. Have either of you ever been a guest on a podcast?
I've been a guest.
Yes, not a host.
I have been a guest on a webinar, and I have been a guest on a I guess we called it a webinar, but it was me and one of my colleagues just chatting about boring molecule stuff, chemistry.
But you had like an audience of like what, 40 people, 100 people, something?
I think 85 people.
That's pretty good, right? So
yeah, well, and that's interesting.
Somebody didn't find it boring.
I was talking to Hannah, who we should invite to these at some point. I was asking her, so what's a normal number of people in a webinar? And she said, well, we usually get 4. So I said, so when I got 40, that was doing pretty well.
40 is good. When I've set them up, I've set up many between 50 to 100.
Nice.
But that's like for bigger work streams, right?
Yeah.
For when we're just starting out, we get 4. 4 is good.
4 is good.
Elena, so what kind of podcast approaches have you taken when you've run them for clients? Or
Webinars mainly, really, and I use them for product marketing, for launches, to communicate what's coming up, especially if it's a roadmap kind of exercise, and if you want to bring out like what's coming in now, what's going to come in later. And if you want to energize people, I actually think that it's good because it just gives a voice to your material.
So did you target people specifically, or did you do just like a LinkedIn blast, or like how are you
specific targeting within the customer group? But I would imagine that a LinkedIn blast could do it as well if it's targeted.
And that's how when we did ours, our webinar, the one about chemistry and molecules I was just talking about, it was just a LinkedIn blast, and just people just signed up.
But it was like a clear, like, I think one of the pieces that worked about that, and probably this is true, Elena, of yours, is like you have to have like it's a topic that's really relevant to a very, very clear niche, so that they know it's for them. Otherwise, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to get myself booked on podcasts. I have 2 bookings now. Just randomly. Nice. It's just interesting. There's this app called Podmatch. So you basically fill in your profile, you say what it is, and then essentially whether you're a host or a guest, and then it sends you like, here's 3. For me, I don't know, I haven't put myself as a host yet, but I put like, here's who I am, whatever, and it gives you like every day I get 3 podcasts in their list of whatever 10,000 podcasts. Like, you might be interested in this, and so I have yet to go and ask somebody of one of those matches. Like, I have not asked them, would you put me on your podcast? But you can do that, and vice versa.
How interesting!
And you can be a host, and so there's a couple ways you can use it. That you can either choose, you can take what they're proposing might be a good match for you, but you can also explore and just type in a topic. Like, for example, Eric, I think I told you there is a podcast on AI in biotech, and so there's only one.
Did you tell me that there's no podcasts about twins in that whole platform?
There are no twin podcasts. So
we need to increase.
That's our
you got a subject there, but for AI and biotech, we could sign up and be the triple host.
Can you put your own podcast? Like, can we, the 3 of us, be like, yeah, we're gonna do a podcast on this?
Absolutely. You can sign up as a guest or as a host or both, and then if you are a host, it will give you matches of guests that they think that seem like, based on their profile, they just sort of match people up. And then you basically reach out to people and say, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? Now, of course, you're sort of looking at them and going, well, is this like, this is somebody who's like done, you can see how many episodes they have. Like if they have 12, that they're probably pretty new, which might be okay for me. But if you're like a real, like
podcaster,
professional podcast guest or whatever, you might be like,
is it called, like, do you call that a pod person?
So anyway, so that one's been interesting. So I have two that I'm booked on. One is a guy who, it's called the KAJ Masterclass, and he is a guy in India, and I don't know why he chose me, but he just seems to interview like interesting people, and
awesome.
Thought I was interesting.
So it's an interesting approach. Like, you go with somebody else's platform, right? We're obviously trying to do like, let's create our own platform, but maybe going with somebody else's platform is better. I have a question for you, Elena. Like, how do you think about like the balance between like, your podcast is for advertising, but there's also this, like, if you push too hard, you're going to push everybody away. And as soon as they feel like you're over advertising, they're just going to shut off the podcast. And that's
yeah, definitely. I think that's a very good point. I think I would more look at it like it's education. It's education. It's talking about something that interests me, something that is important to my product, right? And then hopefully the audience is well targeted and well recruited, or opted in because they have interest. And if you can keep it at kind of like an engaging conversation level, it's better. And then the way to think about it sometimes, I think, is that don't think all the way about selling, kind of think about, okay, let's get them to the next step. And the next step, maybe they will write to us, or they will ask a question, or they would want to, strike a conversation. So like
that whole process of like making the next step not much more of an investment or than the last step seems like it's the like central tenet of at least where I'm at on this whole like lead generation and advertising. I don't know, Jeff, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, so I'm going to actually take a slightly different tag, which is I was actually talking to a guy about this afternoon. I think I mentioned to you earlier that I was talking to this guy and I was trying to convince him that we should try like doing a restaurant podcast or whatever. And then he was talking about more like multi-unit retail. And so my idea was we should call the podcast the Multiverse, and we could talk about multi-unit retail. But anyway, that was my goofy idea. But
it's definitely a thing these days. All the movies are doing it.
But so my point to him was I was actually trying to sell him a slightly different way on this, which is I was trying to basically say, listen, think about it this way. Let's say you have a client, a prospect that you are trying to target, and you are trying to create a relationship with them. One of the things you could do is invite them onto the podcast. And by inviting them onto the podcast, you are asking them questions. You're getting a sense of what their biggest challenges are and whatever. And you can use those challenges and that information to really build a relationship that you could then use to sort of convert into actual.
It's a benevolent bait and switch, because you're giving them actually something beneficial, which is attention and publicity, to try to get them into work with you as a customer. It's kind of like a win-win, right?
Well, yeah, a lot of it happens with like companies organizing seminars and meetings for their clients, right? So if a client is invited to speak at an event like that, it's not dissimilar, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It is definitely allowing a potential client or existing client an opportunity to shine, right? Either shine with your product or shine in anticipation of your product, but it's a promise.
Well, and this concept of like, if you give something to somebody, like, it's just human nature. They feel like they want to give something back. And so, I don't know, maybe it's not that they become your client, but maybe because you've formed a better, stronger relationship, they introduce you to somebody. I mean, I've had some really important conversations come from somebody who didn't actually my original contact wasn't the one who I landed the important conversation that led to business with. So yeah, I think it's a great tactic, and I don't think it's it sounds maybe sneaky and underhanded, but it really isn't. I mean, it's really win-win,
I think if it's done with the best intention, the clients understand that it truly is a good intention. If there is nothing underhanded there and the product holds, I think that's the biggest thing. If the product holds, then the customer and prospective customer would shine.
Yeah.
Right.
Jeff, sorry, I talked over you.
No. All I was going to say was that, in some sense, first of all, I think they generally, there's some value to them for it. So it's not like you are exchanging value, right? You're not just selling to them or whatever it is. The second thing is, if they are, which is generally true, if they're anything like the other, sorry, I've got a dog that's like scratching at a door here, which is not good. I think I'm gonna have to
invite the dog over. Let's say hi to the dog.
Let's see if I can. I don't know if I can make that happen because she's like way down low. I'm just gonna let her out. But the dogs have their own podcast, by the way.
Oh, and it's outside.
Is it spelled PAWWED?
Oh. Anyway, but I think that, if you can, the other thing I think that's really powerful potentially about that is if you can get somebody who is essentially your ideal customer profile on your podcast talking about the problems that are basically true of everyone that you are trying to target, like even better. So you're providing value in the sense that you are, you've got them on your podcast talking, but they're also talking about things that your audience is likely to care about because your audience, you hope, is that ideal client profile. And so you're basically establishing yourself as an expert and connected, and I've seen this problem before and all that kind of stuff. And you're doing it, in the form of something that actually may give some value to the person you're talking to, just because they're looking for some recognition and
like live insight generation, right? And there could be ideas sparked, and ideally the viewers chiming in and saying, hey, what about this or that? And
right.
So I have a different topic, like a little bit of a different angle I want to bring up. Okay, so I think there are a lot of people. So I talk to people because I've been interested in this whole podcast thing for various, aspects of what I do and this or whatever. And I keep asking people, hey, would you want to do a podcast, whatever? But there's just sort of like a resistance. I don't really want to go on. Like, am I going to sound like an idiot or whatever? And I always tell Jeff when we first started doing this is like, the great thing about social media is when you screw up, nobody sees it, right? It does not go viral if it's bad, right? So there's actually some low stakes. Like this is our first podcast. We didn't advertise it. Elena, I said to you, it's like there won't be a lot of people on this call. Actually, there will probably be zero other than the three of us. Like, what do we do about that? How do you? So for people. Let's say somebody finds this video, watches it, like, well, how do you get people to get over that piece of the puzzle?
Well, it's funny that you say it, because this was the conversation I was having with this guy about the restaurant thing earlier. Was I said to him, like, well, we could do. I said between you and me, we probably know. Like I said, I bet you, like I'm pretty sure I could get like the VP or the I guess the SVP of operations at Cracker Barrel. I'm sure she would do it. Or the woman who's the CMO at, for Hardee's and Carl's Jr. I could get her on. I bet I could get her on the podcast. I know, the CFO of First Watch. Like I could get people, I think, just because of my network and I know enough people in the restaurant world to come on and be on our on our podcast. And I said, but anyway, I quoted you, Eric, because he was like, I don't know, whatever. Because I don't think he was thinking about it the way I was talking about it just now, which is like, you could use this as a way of generating content that engages the people you want to talk to, as opposed to, say, the content that he's generating now, which is a little bit too it's like too technical for LinkedIn, and it's not engaging enough and whatever. And so I'm like, you could do this and connect with people. You know where I was going with this, so I'm just going to babble for a second longer, and then I'll pass it over to someone else. But I would say, so I quoted you, Eric, what you just said. I said to him, listen, we could do it. Like, the worst thing that could happen is, like my brother says, is like, if we screw it up, no one will see it. It's not a big deal. So
doesn't go anywhere, right?
I actually think that people might find it interesting because it is an environment that's different from what we do at work, right? Because at least at work, I don't sit in front of a camera. I find ways for other people to sit in front of a camera, or I find ways to talk about my content and just, push my message and whatnot. So people might actually want to do it. One, because it's something different, and two, because it doesn't have to be about their P&L, and it doesn't have to be about their product.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be about their customer. It could be about the topic that is a business topic that they care about, but they don't talk to their coworkers about, and they can talk about it to people from other industries, which I actually think it's even more beneficial, because that's where you start hearing, other people do it differently. Well, maybe I should try too. So there may be actually legs to it.
And actually, I think and Jeff, you and I were talking about this, I don't know if it was yesterday, the idea of like, how do you get the people who are the cold contacts, like people who don't really know you, and how do you shift them into the warm, so there's this grid concept that this book that I've mentioned a couple of times to both of you, $100 million leads, and he talks about warm one-to-one leads and warm one-to-many leads, cold one-to-one leads, which is like cold calls, and cold one-to-many leads, which is like just advertising on a billboard or just blasting something out in general media. But there's got to be a way to sort of shift those leads from cold or very close to cold leads into the more into that sort of warmer lead. And so getting somebody else's audience, for example, you bring the CMO of a company, they have a whole audience that you've never engaged with. That's going to bring their audience to you, starts creating a little bit more of a warm lead. If you talk about something that's interesting to them, maybe they start to opt in, even if it's like a LinkedIn, connection, or subscribing to the channel or whatever. And that's sort of like just like a little bit higher on the warmness, a slightly thawed version of the cool.
So it's funny how alike you and I think, because I made a similar comment to this guy I was talking to this earlier today, like this idea of, I said, listen, you are trying to generate some business within the restaurant world, and I said, do you know who has a lot of restaurant contacts? Is restaurant people. So if I can get in front of, if I can get whatever the SVP of operations at Cracker Barrel on here, like the SVP of Cracker Barrel has a lot of restaurant connections because she's worked at
different restaurants than you.
All these different restaurants. So she worked at Applebee's, she worked at whatever. She's worked at all these different restaurants. So she has this whole network of restaurant people. And so how do you leverage that? And so I was talking to him about, I was talking to this guy about my LinkedIn approach recently, and I'm just starting. I mean, it's not huge or anything, but my LinkedIn approach, like I get a lot more likes when I talk about something that I know that people know about. So like I talked about the book Atomic Habits, got a whole bunch of likes and a bunch of comments because people know that book. Or
good book.
Yesterday I randomly was like, I'm just going to post about the 7 Habits, Stephen Covey's book. And I post about this book, and a bunch of people like, yes, that book is so great and I love it or whatever. And so it's like, and you could sort of look at that and say, oh, well, Jeff, you're sort of cheating, but like, that's not cheating. Like that's actually,
why cheating? That's relating.
That's relating, right?
I like Atomic Habits. It's a good book.
It's a little bit tough with like the Kelsey brothers, right? I keep thinking of them as like, oh, they have this amazing podcast and everybody watches them, but what supercharged it? Taylor Swift supercharged it, right? Like what, catching the tailwinds of somebody else's fame is not a bad way to do it. And
Tailwind of anything is a good wind.
yeah.
So this was I saw this effect that we're talking about as I saw it referred to recently as the Walmart strategy, and the reason it's called the Walmart strategy is like this idea of like people are driving to Walmart. If I can get my store like on the way to Walmart that does something, you know, unique that Walmart doesn't do or whatever, I'll drive business. So I want to be on the thoroughfare where all the traffic is passing through. And so anyway, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's actually a really good strategy. Like
Smart.
I don't know all these people, but they know these people, so I'm going to bring them on. And then will my friends all watch this thing? I don't know, but their friends probably will because they don't go on podcasts. They're not like doing podcasts all the time. So their friends are like, "Oh wow, I saw you on this podcast. That's really cool." But what does that do? It elevates the interviewer, the podcaster, and says, "Hey, these people, like they're asking the questions. They must be experts, right?" I mean, it just creates a sense of expertise.
Well, I also think it creates a sense of genuine interest to some degree because it just kind of provides the environment where people can opt in if they wish.
Right.
Absolutely. So I think, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things you can do with this kind of, it creates that sense of thought leadership. It creates the sense of, you know what you're talking about. And it's also interesting. I would say like, there's something about, actually I was having this conversation with another person. I don't know. I had a lot of conversations today. So you're all like, what does he do all day? I have conversations with people, but I was talking to this guy and we were talking about this thing, like sometimes the most important thing as a consultant or whatever is that you know the right questions to ask. You don't have to have the answers as much as can I elicit the right information that gets, sort of between you and the client, you develop the answers. And so I think that's another value that podcasting can bring is like it demonstrates to people without this person asks, got a really insightful things out of the person you're talking to is an interesting, way of showcasing your skill as well. So
exactly. I also think that there is a concept that I think is overlooked in business, and Jeff, given your roles, you probably would relate to this. It's thinking together. It's not really impressing each other with a PowerPoint that I've presented, but more about putting together thoughts with a benefit in mind, with a finite result in mind, right? Thinking together. So when I was in grad school, I actually had to do that. And my professor was very good about it. He actually co-wrote all our papers with us. And I just went back in those days. I was like, hey, why is he doing it? Why is he wasting his time? But many years later, I understood it taught me to think together with other people. So bringing enough people into a podcast and spinning it under a premise that we are to think together about your issues and the next guest's issues and the issues in the community. And then it kind of brings and amplifies the voices that otherwise couldn't find each other.
Right.
Yeah. You bring up PowerPoint, and I think, I forget where it was that I read this a while back, and they're like, PowerPoint has destroyed, essentially melted people's brains, right? But I wonder, just sort of thinking along those lines, you almost, because it was so hard to make presentations, before we had the computers and PowerPoints, and you had to like actually, grease pencil draw them on like plastic, whatever it was, like people probably talked more and, probably they may have sort of gamed things out more with each other because it was just it wasn't practical. We need to tip back. And actually we've talked about this with like the pitch deck, right? Yeah. We were talking about Christina, who Jeff and I work with, and how she was like, yeah, just toss the pitch deck out. And I can tell you, like, watching somebody's pitch deck when they're first coming to you or whatever, like it makes my eyeballs bleed. Let's just
Yeah, and some co-creation and thinking together would help
Right.
right then and there.
Yeah, like what? Even just this, the co-thinking of like, is this the right presentation to
Exactly.
be bothering with? You're
Right.
wasting my time.
Well, I was saying this to somebody yesterday. Like part of the problem with PowerPoint presentation is if you put it's kind of the like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail kind of problem. It's like when you have a PowerPoint presentation in front of you, you will present each slide because you're like, I have to go through these slides, and it's like, well, what if that is totally unnecessary? I think the other thing, Eric, you're hitting on just to continue the using aphorisms or whatever is there's the that saying that I think is attributed to Mark Twain of I wanted to write you a short note, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long letter. Is kind of the other thing I think that you were talking about that happens with PowerPoint, and I had never thought about that, but like back in the old days when you had to make an acetate or whatever it is, you didn't put, or even worse, I don't know. I remember once, Elena, you'll remember, I was in this presentation. You'll remember these people. With Norm at Nabisco, who were presenting to Mike Snackarib, and Norm was like, made me make these gigantic posters of the concepts I wanted to do. And it was just really goofy because I like have I'm handing these gigantic posters to Mike and he's holding them and like kind of laughing because it's like this massive poster and he's holding his hand because it was just like 4 of us in the room. So it was ridiculous. But the point is, it's like it gets you really, really focused on, I only have one poster, I only have one acetate or whatever it was. So I'm like, it better be the most important thing. Whereas now it's like you can vomit all kinds of stuff onto a slide and like
You can have a full-blown flu symptoms on your slide.
Yeah, and people do, really.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yeah. Anyway, so we're coming up on the half hour. We got a couple minutes left. I don't know if we want to like just jump into like your last profound thought of the podcast, and maybe like reflect on the podcast. I don't know, Elena, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I like the thought of podcast as co-creation and as discussing insight in a live format. I also like podcast as a form of bringing good thinkers from different industries together and bringing insights to their respective communities. So that's kind of my thing.
Yeah. Jeff, you want to?
Sure. I guess one of the things that I was realizing that I think is really interesting is I like this 3-way format. It leads to a better conversation than a one-on-one format, which is very much becomes an interview. So we had more of I've been watching. Sorry, what?
I was just saying, what are you trying to say? Are you saying the ones that you and I have done together?
You're super boring. No, I'm just saying I've been watching podcasts recently and just sort of like the format, and it's interesting, it's fascinating. But when you're doing it as a one-to-one thing, it's like it's like one person asking questions and the other person giving their input. So what you're getting is this
interview.
You're sort of getting the sort of an insight into the mind of that person. But to talk, Elena, about your point about the co-creation and so forth, it's just interesting. The having 3 people having a conversation. I don't know. I'm sure there are other podcasts that do this. For whatever reason, I've seen a lot that are more like of that one-to-one interview format. So anyway, that was my profound. I don't know if it was profound, but it was my thought.
Very, very perfect.
All right, now it's your
I guess the thing that I found interesting, Jeff, you brought a lot of this up. I think in the beginning, is just the many ways that this format actually can be used. Like you said, like you pointed out, this like you can turn it on its head and use it as a way to recruit a particular client. Use it as a I was talking about mechanism for changing how warm the clients are. Elena, you were talking about the how it brings different, the different points of view. You don't have to use it as a pure sales tool, but it creates this really, stronger relationship with your audience, etc. So I think it's a really interesting tool. I also I don't know. I find it fun to just go live, and then, well, hopefully when we advertise, we'll actually get some people watching. I'm looking at the upper corner where it says live 30 minutes and 14 seconds. And then it has an eyeball, which I assume is the count of the number of people watching. And it says 0.
That's awesome.
Anyway, all right. Well, it was great. Let's keep doing these if you guys are up for it. And, we'll do these again. Maybe the three of us can connect right now on our other thread, and we can recap.
Wonderful. Let's do that.